Thank you for watching this video. Please help us keep the show alive by liking and sharing this video and by subscribing to the show and making sure the notification button is switched on. For those of you who can help a little bit more, there's a Patreon link down below where you can contribute whatever you can. Every little does help, and all the money will go directly back into the show. You can also keep up with our latest content on Instagram at The No Show Pod, as you can see on the screen. As you know, The No Show is an initiative designed to make academic research accessible to everyone. So do contribute to the conversation, leave some questions, have a discussion, and I'll make sure I get back to everyone. Nigel, thank you so much for joining us on The No Show. I'm really pleased to have you.
It's my pleasure to be here, Sam. Good to meet you. And I looked at the list of distinguished people who preceded me, and I'm hardly equal to them, but it's a pleasure to be here to talk about my work. And
that's very modest of you. And I mean, to sort of start off with, you work on an incredibly important challenge that, you know, faces humanity at large, but, you know, some countries more than others. So talk to me about what were your motivations in sort of starting this journey on working on food security and nutrition?
I think you're saying it goes back to my undergraduate degree when I was taking a seminar, or I was sitting in someone else's seminar. I think it wasn't my own work, but we were discussing the world food problem that there was in the 1970s, and protein and energy malnutrition and undernutrition and hunger, really. It occurred to me, come on, we can't just ship food to these people who are hungry around the world, because it was at a time when the solution to problems of hunger were to engage in massive shipments from relatively rich countries, and so countries like the United States send food to poorer countries. I thought, no, we need to go there and work with people to help them grow their own food. Mm-hmm. And so I got into a career. I've been working for, I don't know, over 40 years now, and this used to do with agriculture in developing countries to try to improve the way poor people could develop their agriculture, could feed themselves and gain a living. Even smallholder farmers who have small plots of land, how they might improve their lives and livelihoods by developing their agriculture. So it goes back right to the very beginning, and my first degree was in agricultural sciences, but since then I lots of other areas. I got into academic work accidentally, because initially my work was in Southern Africa with the UK government, the Ministry of Overseas Development as it was then. But then I worked for about 12 years with indigenous groups in South America. That was a bit of a surprise for me to move from Africa to South America. But I found myself working amongst hunter-gatherers who weren't actually agricultural people, but trying to help them develop an agriculture as they had to become on land. They traditionally roamed vast areas of South America. In this case, the country was Paraguay, but hunter-gatherer people have a different sort of lifestyle. They still do, but they've increasingly had to settle because of pressures from the wider society. Mm-hmm. So how to help them to develop a viable agriculture and look after themselves. Agriculture doesn't mean food, it means jobs, and it means income, it means, for communities, it means exports too. So they were they loved cattle, but they grew cotton and other things. So I worked on that quite a bit, but after 12 or 14 years, it was time to come back to the UK, and I then got into agricultural economics, because it seemed to be a gap in my training from science, natural sciences to social sciences, into the economics. I thought, I need to know more about this. So I took a course in agricultural economics, and then I stayed on at the university to do a PhD, and the rest has been work on different facets of agricultural development in many, many parts of the world. So I've done lots of different things. I got into academia accidentally, but I've also found myself doing a whole range of things that I didn't expect to do, because academics normally go deep into one particular subject area. But I've done an awful lot of interesting things in lots of interesting places, and so I've got a lot of breadth, more breadth than depth, shall we say, whereas academics are normally deep rather than broad.
But arguably, for a problem like food security and nutrition in different parts of the world, So you surely need more multidisciplinary approaches to it, as opposed to just looking at the nutrition or looking at just the growing of the crops.
Well, this is an ongoing battle, Hussein. It's true that in many areas people work within their own disciplines where they feel most comfortable, and it's difficult for individuals for spread beyond their area of core competence into other things. And actually, for me, getting into nutrition is a return to what I did originally. In my agricultural sciences first degree, I did a bit of nutrition. So in a sense, I've come back to where I began. But the circle of activities has taken me through natural resources management, issues to do with water, edible caterpillars, citrus, coffee, a whole range of things. I have dabbled in a lot. It's been my privilege, but I think it's a little bit unusual that people do span so many disciplines. And when we talk about agriculture and nutrition specifically, over the years these disciplines haven't been well integrated. And the reason for my work over 6 years in South Asia, looking at agriculture and nutrition, is try to bridge the disciplinary gaps and show how agriculture is not just a source of jobs, not just a sort of products that can be exported, but logically, when you think about it, it's a source of people's food as well. But it's a bit more complicated when you think of farmers. Don't they all eat their own food? No, they don't. No, they often sell their products and they go to markets. So in markets, what do they buy? Well, they buy what's available and what they can afford. And so you're immediately into markets, but you're into logistics, how high quality foods can get to markets. If they don't grow it, they have to buy it. And what sort of things do they buy? And do they buy the food that's really important for their own nutrition? Well, then you're very close to saying, okay, what is the adequacy of a diet? And you find you've strayed from agriculture through economics into nutrition, and the nutritional science can be brought together, and it must be done. But a lot of us working in this area recognize that it's difficult to cross the disciplinary barriers, but that we must do so. And of course, it takes you into policies and politics. What are the policies that governments can adopt to in order to encourage good foods, but also economics that will deliver good quality foods to markets. And hey ho, you get into education for farmers so they can do new things, but education for consumers so they buy the right foods. And you're dealing with a whole load of disciplinary areas that it's difficult to manage, but you do need to bring people with different skills together.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting that now that you've sort of retired your academic duties, you're working with an organization in Mexico to sort of look at this problem. My guess is that the organization does take this multidisciplinary approach.
It's beginning to. CIMMYT has been a plant breeding organization. That's what they were set up to do. That's what they've been provided with money for. They do their job and other people do their job. You mind your own business. You go on with your own business. And then there have been, and there continue to be, plenty of challenges in terms of plant breeding, because with climate change, we need new varieties that are heat resistant, drought resistant, and don't expose people to vulnerabilities. But at the same time, we've got global problems to do with malnutrition, which is to do with vitamins and minerals, as we've said, but also these non-communicable diseases to do with broader health issues. Can cereals help in that problem? Well, yes, emphatically they can. The whole grain cereals, which many of us know about, but we don't actually do much about, and we do to increase the contribution, to improve the contribution of cereals to these other problems that other people have been dealing with. And so you get specialization within organizations in particular areas. And looking around the international agricultural research area, there are some organizations which work on cereals, some that work on roots and tubers, some that work in dry land, some that work in tropical areas, some that do work on food policy and nutrition. But it is difficult. The reality is it's difficult to look across different areas because very often organizations are competing for different sets of funding. So you focus on what you're good at and you don't tend to collaborate in those other areas. So we're learning this, and everyone's now talking about multidisciplinary, multi-organizational approaches. But actually, to get people to do that is a challenge. And you look at in other international organizations in the United Nations system. The Food and Agricultural Organization is very good at food and agriculture. The WHO is very well, and the World Food Programme is good at providing food to people in disaster situations. But even the UN system is finding more and more that these organizations have to work together, because apparently simple problems are usually much more complex than they appear to be and need multiple approaches. Another area is working in Afghanistan. International security is hugely important. So you're definitely into international politics, but the impact of it's a fairly narrow area in food security issues, and I've got colleagues at SOAS who work on conflict and migration, but the health and nutritional consequences, food security issues to do with that are really massive, and depend on all these other areas and other organizations as well. So I find myself in Afghanistan. I'm really worried about the security and the international politics, and what can be done to bring peace to Afghanistan and resolve conflict on state arms groups and the government. And then you've got the Americans, you've got the Indians and the Pakistanis and the Iranians and the Chinese, all involved in the peace and security of Afghanistan. And problems get much more complex than they appeared originally. So I go to Bamyan, and I'm very concerned with the livelihoods of the people, and the people with whom I'm sitting in the fields and talking about food and nutrition. But hey ho, you go to the market in Bamyan, which used to be a safe place, and a couple of months ago there was a bomb which killed people. Market itself in a formerly safe area. So I think what I'm saying is that these are really complex problems and can't just be solved by specialists, which I think is perhaps, I'm repeating what you told me. Yeah, multidisciplinary approaches really matter when you look at the complex nature of world problems. And this is skimming over issues to do with climate change and natural resources and so on.
Absolutely. You point to so many important factors. One of the factors that interests me, you mentioned this research that you did in Bamyan was sort of funded by the British government. Why does the British government invest in this sort of research, do you think?
Well, I've had occasion to write to my own MP about the cuts in international development that are being proposed because of COVID. The government has decided to reduce the spending on international development, and it's cut the autonomy of what used to be the Department for International Development and City Foreign and Commonwealth Office, so that we now have a Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office that looks at diplomacy and international development together. So we're at a time when the government is cutting back its involvement in that because of budget problems and our own economic stresses that are going to result from COVID. But what I wrote to the MP was, I think there's no doubt we have an ethical and moral responsibility to address the problems that there are around the world. That's partly a historical thing. Black Lives Matter just show how culpable, in a sense, the colonial countries such as the UK have been in the past. But we have so I think we have a historical responsibility. We have a current moral responsibility to take care of other people. We can't just sit by where there is hunger and where there's war and lack of education. But it does happen that it's in our own interests too to help address these problems. There's so many interlinkages between the United Kingdom and overseas countries. It's not just that there are brothers and sisters overseas and we need to look out for their well-being, but it actually is in our interest because they're partners in international trade. And if you want to be a bit more hard-nosed about it, there are questions of international security and migration. It's odd that a conservative government that has in the past expressed concern about migration thinks that in international spending on aid and development, how can they see that they're not even partly in our own interests? So it's not primarily out of our own interests that I'm keen on this work, but there are moral and ethical responsibilities. Again, it's a complex issue.
Yeah. And there is so much there to sort of unpack. As you mentioned, like it's also a very geopolitical situation somewhere like Afghanistan, where you have so many players involved and so many stakeholders. What, over this period of time that you've been doing this research, in general, you're broadly speaking, just being involved in food security and nutrition, what's been sort of the major changes over time that you've experienced?
Sorry, it cut out then. Can you say that again?
What have been the major changes in the sort of dynamics of how people approach the problem of food security over time, as you've experienced it?
Well, as I said, when I was originally at university, the answers to hunger overseas were for rich countries to send food, and particularly the United States had a huge program of providing food, sending people around the world. It's a no-brainer that one should develop people's own productive capacity, agricultural development on a more local level. So help people to grow their own food rather than send it there. Now, as you begin to unpack that issue, you begin to realize, well, not everyone wants to grow their own food or is able to grow their own food. So food security definitely comes from markets as well. International markets matter, but it's and self-dependency or not necessarily a sensible policy if you can buy more food more cheaply on the markets. But that takes us into areas of international trade, which are very complex in themselves. So recognition that food security is both a question of own production and purchase from markets at an individual household level, but also at an international level, at a global level, at a national level. There is this in terms of food security. Markets do matter, but we can't just trust to markets because markets often they're not always free and fair, and people get ripped off in markets. Right now there are big problems in India at the moment because the government is trying to liberalize markets and introduce efficiencies into the markets by, economically plausible policies, but the poorer people in India, the small farmers, and there are hundreds of millions of people who depend on markets in India. They're very nervous about being ripped off by large agribusinesses. Currently, farmers can sell to the government and sell to a formalized market system and get guaranteed prices. If they liberalize the markets, then they can sell to other buyers, private sector buyers, agribusiness firms. But whatever the rights or wrongs are of this question, the people in India, Punjab, who are in Delhi as we talk, protesting against the government, they're doing so because they're afraid that they're in the longer term, the opportunities to trade fairly are going to be taken away from them, and they'll be outcompeted by large organizations. So you have small farmers selling to large agribusiness corporations. That's not, history I think shows that that's not going to lead to very fair exchange. So, there's a big debate in terms of food security, health and well-being, the extent to which we can rely on markets and the extent to which governments should intervene and not exactly manage markets, but ensure that markets operate for the benefits of poor people as well. Mm-hmm. And interesting that we should talk about this in the UK right now. We know from the experience of COVID that there are gross inequalities in our country. UK has always been highly unequal, but we're seeing the depth of the inequalities actually now. And more, thanks to people like Marcus Rashford, we're seeing the need that poor people need to be given better opportunities. Yeah. They can't, if they don't have the education, or if they don't have the job opportunities, or if they're disadvantaged in various ways, these people need support from the government. So one of the long-running debates about to what extent the markets can work and the extent to which governments should intervene, this is becoming a particular here in the UK. It's one that's being debated very much in India at the moment, and it's been a global problem. And back to questions of health and nutrition, we in this country, in the UK, need to provide food to children of poor families, either through vouchers or through school meals, in order for them to get a better chance in life, in order for them to grow up healthy and take the advantage of the opportunities that are open to the better off among them. So this has been a perennial problem. It's been going on. Governments versus markets in the area of food, but in every other area of the economy, it's really important.
Yeah, I mean, you pointed to so many important things there, and particularly sort of the approach that the government has towards nutrition of young people locally, like let alone internationally. And you mentioned this; it's a perennial problem. It's something that talks to the heart of the inequality in the country and sort of how people end up faring later on in life. But then you have a problem like coronavirus, a pandemic like coronavirus comes and sort of destroys markets, destroys movements, destroys logistics. How does that play into food security in places that don't necessarily have the support that the government can provide in the UK? So, for example, somewhere like Afghanistan or somewhere in India where people struggle, how has the pandemic created a major problem with food security?
You put your finger on something that's really important. A lot of people in my area of agriculture, food security, and nutrition, very, very worried about the impacts of coronavirus. Probably we can manage it in this country because we're still, despite the economic constraints, we're a rich country and we can provide support to those who are most disadvantaged. The impacts on poorer countries, well, I just sidestep a moment and say it's a real puzzle, but in parts of Africa, it does appear that the coronavirus hasn't had the drastic impact that it's had in the UK and Brazil, United States, and many other rich countries. So in some respects, they're not so badly off. But where coronavirus has had an impact, and India is a good case. There was a lockdown in India, and immediately all the poor people who depended on daily wage their jobs, they lost their form of income. And in India, there aren't the social supports with which we're familiar in the UK and other developed countries. There isn't the unemployment benefit. There isn't universal credit. So as soon as those daily wage labourers lost their jobs, they lost any form of income, and the first preoccupation is, they're not worried about education. They're worried about food on a day-to-day basis, and it immediately in India introduced a lot of hardship, and people also banned. You had individuals who were hundreds of miles away from their families, and they couldn't get back to them. That situation has normalized a bit, but the loss of employment opportunities and then the constraints on transporting food around the country meant that markets were short of food. And then another important area is the economic strains put on poorer countries in terms of the provision of healthcare. I think these are some of the effects that people are really very concerned about and are likely to have a long-term consequences. Vulnerable people are children who can't get sufficient quantities or qualities of nutrition, and mothers, pregnant mothers, lactating mothers. That's another vulnerable group particularly. And the forecasts are that on top of the 700 million or so people who are hungry right now, is that COVID might make another 200 million people hungry within the next year, and the long-term consequences is things like the Sustainable Development Goals. We haven't talked about the Sustainable Development Goals, but the objective of zero hunger by the year 2030 it's making it much more difficult to hit these global targets.
Mm-hmm. I mean, based on all these really pressing issues, is there anything to be optimistic about?
Well, apart from the vaccine, which is going to be spread out, yeah, a lot of work, and you can look at farmers scattered around the world, which is sort of partly where our conversation began. You can look at them as victims of difficult circumstances, and it doesn't rain or children can't go to school. You can see them as victims, but that's a mistake. Experience shows that with people all around the world, that that there are opportunities, but they have skills, they have attributes, they have initiative. They're not without their own inherent skills, but they do need more opportunities. And I think recognizing that people do have within them the resources that can be developed, and to take advantage of opportunities, if only these opportunities can be given them, of better education and jobs and so on, then they will. They're not victims in as much as they can develop themselves, they can progress, and they can improve their own lives. They do need a little bit of help, and it's often the rich countries that make things difficult about the economic system and how multinationals don't necessarily work for the benefit of the poor people. Well, we need to introduce changes in those systems so that there are opportunities that poorer people can take advantage of. In terms of we will get over COVID, and there will be other problems that'll come up to replace COVID. Longer term challenges affect us all, at climate change, but there is a will and a growing recognition that issues to do with carbon dioxide, global problems on that scale, we can deal with them if only there's a political will. And we give thanks that there are politicians, there are individuals, there are movements that are bringing pressure to bear on policymakers to change international conditions such that people's opportunities can be improved. So is there hope? Yes, I think there's always hope.
Well, I think that's a fantastic answer, and a reason to be optimistic. What advice would you give to anyone that's looking to sort of get in the world of tackling the problem of food security?
Sorry, can you go back over that question? You cut out.
What advice would you give to anyone getting into this field that you've been in for however many years?
Well, if you're interested in working in food security, nutrition, and agriculture, well, it does require. It's a fascinating area. Things aren't going to go away. There's going to be a demand for skills. In my area, particularly, we're looking very much at the year 2030, when we'll reach the development goals. We won't have resolved all the problems of zero hunger and non-communicable diseases in 2030. I think it's not going to go away. So there will still be opportunities for younger people to work in this and develop a career. There's a lot still we don't know about nutrition and health. I talked about things about cereals and energy, which is talking about carbohydrates and carbohydrates in the diet. So there are still jobs to do in terms of plant breeding to produce the sort of seeds that will grow and give people better nutrition. There's really, what I've learned in the last few months and so on, is that even the basic science about metabolism, how we metabolize our food, biomedical sciences connected with nutrition, what it is in these substances in whole grain improve nutrition. How does it work in the body? What do these essential nutrients and food components, what do they actually do? There's still a lot of basic science that's missing. So from food science, from cereal science, like growing grains that are more nutritious, to how they operate in the body, and then the industrial processes that currently strip out all the nutrients out of cereals, and yet whole grain bread that's both nutritious but also appetizing. People don't eat whole grain products because they just don't taste so good, or they go off. there are lots of scientific issues there. In the area of international politics, we're never going to be short of problems to be solved. Understanding how people work and what we can do to overcome global insecurity. There are ongoing problems into the political science and international security stuff that are important. And any of the areas in which we go down, I think there's going to be need for skills. So you need to go to university probably and study some of these things, but keep an open mind into the range of the problems, because it does require, you have to study initially and focus on something, but keep an open mind in the other disciplines and how they hang around. We've talked about the range of disciplines that are involved in food security and nutrition. Having some knowledge of all of these does matter. So you do have to focus, but at the same time, don't be restricted on vision.
I think that's fantastic advice, and I think it applies to so many other fields. Nigel, how can people reach you if people want to reach out to you? Where can they find you?
I guess on the SOAS website, my email is np10@soas.ac.uk. That's there. That would be the best way to do it. So I'm still, although I'm emeritus now at SOAS, I'm still on the website, so people can look it up.
I'll link it onto the episode anyway, so people can reach it. Nigel, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. I've really...
And various publications that reach those two papers. They're both accessible through the SOAS website.
Yeah, I'll link them in so anyone can reach them.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate your time. Thank you for watching this video. Please help us keep the show alive by liking and sharing this video, and by subscribing to the show and making sure the notification button is switched on. For those of you who can help a little bit more, there's a Patreon link down below where you can contribute whatever you can. Every little does help, and all the money will go directly back into the show. You can also keep up with our latest content on Instagram @TheNoShowPod, as you can see on the screen. As you know, The No Show is an initiative designed to make academic research accessible to everyone. So do contribute to the conversation, leave some questions, have a discussion, and I'll make sure I get back to everyone.